time management. What to prioritize with your time as far as your fantasy team goes. What are the must-haves to do, the nice-to-haves, and everything else in between. We'll also have a conversation about what happens when your fantasy team just doesn't have it this year. Pitcher List senior writer Scott Chu joins us on the Beat the Shift podcast, coming up next. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. We got rained out a couple times this week, weather in New York, but in between then, I pitched a couple good games. We had an exciting one that went to extra innings yesterday, and I threw on Sunday almost a no-hitter with 2 outs in the 8th, a hit off of me, 7 2/3. No hit. That was just culmination. And it was against a good team. It wasn't just a crappy team. So culmination of some really good stuff that I've been throwing lately. That's fast screwball. Just really fools people. Got a lot of swings and misses. How about you? You're playing too as well, right?
I am playing, but I had a little vacation this past weekend. I went to Baltimore, and I got to see the Orioles in person against the Mets. Obviously, Baltimore won, but I got to see the stadium again. I've been there before. Beautiful stadium, great team. The team, you look at their lineup when you see them in person. You compare them to the current Mets that they're putting out in the field. It's not even close. The talent is not even close, and I'm so happy to say that I have so many of those guys on the Orioles on my current rosters in fantasy leagues.
And hopefully you also have the newscaster, the sportscaster, I should say, Kevin Brown, who said the Orioles lost a couple of games to the Rays. And all of a sudden he got suspended. How crazy was that?
That's. I just love the way how all the other announcers got on the Orioles for that, because that's just not right.
Yeah, I mean, does the producer have to make the graphic that he was going to talk about? Like they knew he was going to talk about it, and yet
yes, it was planned. It was written on the screen. He read from the screen, and he got suspended for reading for something on the screen, which makes zero sense.
Well. Hopefully I won't talk badly about a player, and then Fangraphs will can me on this show. I mean, just that's crazy. But all right, anyways, we've got a great show planned here. From Hacks and Jacks, great podcast on the Pitcher List Network. Welcome to the show, Scott Chu. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing fantastic. Excited to be here.
And we are excited to have you. First, just to throw it out there, how are you doing in your leagues this year, Scott?
I am doing much better than I expected in terms of at least my expert leagues, right? So I'm in 15-team tout mixed auction. And first of all, the in-person auction had been so long since I'd been able to do one because of COVID and all those things. That is so much fun, right? Just because of the way you get to assemble your team for an auction, and then in person just adds that level of drama and comedy and all those things. So doing fairly well. I've been in the top 3 in that league for most of the season. I was at the top for most of April and May, and I've faded a little bit. Haven't been able to find the right free agents to keep myself going, just because I knew that my April and May had some hot streaks that got me to the top that weren't going to keep going. But doing okay in the 15-team mixed tout auction. And then in TGFBI, I'm doing fairly well too. I've got, I'm second in my league, I think somewhere in the top 60 overall. So I'm pleased with it. I'm happy about it.
No, amazing. And Ruvain, how are you doing in your leagues? It's been a while.
I'm doing pretty well. We have a home league that we're in together. We were in first place for a while, but for some reason, people think we know what we're talking about. No one wants to trade with us, so another team passed us because we got screwed again. But whatever, that's fine. We're still in second place. We're holding our own pretty close to first. We're in the NFBCs that we're in together. We're actually doing quite well. We were in second place. We had a couple injuries, so we fell down a little bit. I think we're in fourth place now, but we're in the running for the money, so that's always good. And in the GDD league, which has a bunch of professionals actually in it. Like Eric Cross is in it, Jen Piacenti's in it, Derek Carty's with it with you. There's some Ryan Howland's in it, Justin Mason's in it, and so that league I'm doing pretty well. That league I'm in second place, and I've been holding my own pretty well. So I'm trying to make sure my injuries now don't kill me. But right now I'm holding my own, and it's my first year in the league. So I mean I'm ahead of you, so I guess that counts for something.
Yeah, I won't talk about that league. That's not going well. But otherwise, it's going well. I'm third in labor in Tout Wars in third place, although it's a head-to-head. I actually have the number one most points, so I'm getting unlucky there. I'm trying to fight Frank Stamfel to get the second place so that I can get a bye in the playoffs. I'm playing him like in a couple of weeks, so that's going to be a key matchup. But there we go. That's the story. So, along the lines of that, what players, Scott, for you have worked out? Now, obviously, if you get some, random player, who just has gone off, Lane Thomas, wow, that guy really worked. I mean, unless you really planned for Lane Thomas working out, you sort of got lucky. Was there a player that worked out for you that you sort of came into the draft with a strategy, said, I know this guy's gonna be undervalued. I'm picking him anyways, and it was the right deal. Well, can you name a player like that for you?
I'm actually going to look right at the top of the draft. I was someone who really had Freddie Freeman as my number one overall first baseman. I had ranks come out on Pitcher List. I said, this is my guy, because he's just always a top three first baseman, it seems. And of course, this season, Freddie Freeman's doing fantastic. But, I took him in several leagues in the first round as my first round pick towards the back of it. Vlad Guerrero was on the board. Other players were on the board, and I went with it. And those leagues are going pretty well, I'd say.
Are you reading my notes here? Because I literally was going to talk about Freddie Freeman as well for the exact same reason. And listeners of our show know that, before the season started, I was basically advocating that he's a top 5 pick in drafts. And it's because of the low risk, right? He's been a consistent $25, $30 player every year. I'd pay $35 every year to know that a guy is going to get $25, $30 every year. And that really, really does. What about for you, Ruvain?
I think I picked out 3 guys that have really hit and really done well. Nico Horner. I had him very high. I liked him a lot. He was in our group of middle infielders that we really wanted, and I thought his name stood out, and he was ready to take the next step. I thought I got him at a very good price. And you have Ryan Mountcastle, Anthony Santander. They both had sort of down years last year, but we saw what they could do back in 2020 and 2021, and they just had a bad last year. And recency bias, people didn't value them high. We got them at good prices, and I think those guys have really carried the team, along with pitchers like Chris Bassett, who we got you got very cheap, and he's holding his own against a really tough competition. I hate the fact that I still sit him every once in a while against a good team, and then he pitches well against a good team, but he's doing really well compared to where he was going in the drafts.
What about for you, Scott, in terms of a player that didn't work out for you?
Yeah, I'm going to start. Yeah, I'll start with a little bit of a cop out here. It hasn't gone well because of injury. And that's O'Neal Cruz. I paid everything I possibly could to get O'Neal Cruz on every team I could. I loved the changes he made last season, especially towards the end where he started taking more walks. He got better at making contact. He was doing all the things I wanted him to do. He showed us the exact same things early in the season, so I was trying to make trades for him constantly. And then, of course, we lost him until hopefully maybe the back half of this month we might see him come back. But that's been really difficult. I also was a big fan of Spencer Torkelson, thinking he'd get a rebound. He's showing us flashes, but he just can't show us what we want in terms of power with any kind of consistency. It just comes in such brief waves that it's been hard to rely on him in any format, really.
Yeah, I mean, the question, of course, here, didn't work out. Obviously, if there's an injured player, it doesn't work out. Obviously that's gonna happen for you. I think the worst thing that comes out is where you have a player and you just keep thinking he's gonna turn it on, he's giving you zeros, or it's a pitcher and he just keep destroying your ratios. Like for me, I'd say Luis Severino. I mean, well, first of all, he was sort of injured coming into this season, but you know what? I'll take a big discount to buy him this year, and that didn't work out in terms of he wouldn't pitch, and then he just absolutely stunk. So he was a really bad one. How about another one for you, Ruvain?
Yeah, I have to say that Severino, I have to go along with you because we're from New York. We heard all the hype about Severino coming into this year. That may have played into our heads just a little bit along with the numbers. But I think a guy like Anthony Rizzo, who we drafted in NFBC, and he was great for like a month and a half, but then he got hurt and he played through the injury. And that happens a lot when players play through injuries and they don't tell us about the injury. They don't tell anybody about the injury. And it screws everything because they're just not performing the way they should. Like even Pete Alonso. I mean, I'm not saying he's having down year or anything like that, but he played through an injury, and players who play through an injury usually don't live up to their aspirations of what they want to do for that year, and it really hurts you in the long term. So I think those type of players are the hardest ones to deal with, and I think those are the ones that bring you down.
I think Alonso's going to be pretty undervalued going to next year because there was a month and a half or even more where he pretty much played through an injury, and his numbers are really bad. I mean, he's batting like 225 on the year, whereas he really should have been like a 270 or at least a 260 player. So he's going to be undervalued next year. I think we see in the last month what he's doing. He's hitting a home run every other day right now. Big fan of Alonso going into 2024. But today we're going to be talking about time management in our strategy section. Sort of what to do with your time, because the one thing about fantasy baseball is there's a limited amount of things you can do. People have jobs, people have kids, people have families, people go out, you only have so much time in the day, and obviously you can do a deep dive in every single player, and you can go to ball games, but we have to know how to prioritize your time, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So let's just throw it out generally for you, Scott, and at a bare minimum, to really keep up with your fantasy teams competitively. Obviously, you can, just throw a team there and walk away and do nothing. But to really be somewhat competitive and to have a fighting chance each week, what are the bare minimum tasks that you absolutely need to do as number one priority?
I mean, obviously, if it's a daily league, especially having that lineup set is such a key. I mean, in daily leagues, you can win leagues just from having your lineup set, right? Like just by swapping out your shortstop when he doesn't play that day. So in the daily leagues, I spend a lot of time just making sure my lineups are the way I want them. I try to get ahead a couple days. So just in case I have a day where I'm too busy and I can't get to it. But whenever I can sit down and really look at those lineups, I try to spend time with that on daily leagues. Now in weekly leagues, it's a lot more about preparing for the waiver wire at the end of the week because I only get one bite at that apple. Right? I only get one chance to add players. So I really need to invest my time in making sure that I'm adding the players I want to add, that it's players either that I'm projecting to get maybe a role that's going to be, that's currently undervalued, or it's a call up and I need to know how much I'm going to bid on that player because again, I get one shot at a lot of these guys. A good example would be he's been bad in the second half, but Elly De La Cruz, I think everybody knew you got one shot to get him. And if you didn't spend the time to say, this is how much I'm willing to spend, this is what I project to get back from Elly De La Cruz, this is what he adds to my team, I think you were doing yourself a disservice. And we're going to have more and more call-ups as we go. We're going to have players sort of come out of nowhere. How much do you bid on a Chaz McCormick? If all of a sudden he's the hottest outfielder in your 15-team league when waiver Sunday comes up, are you ready? How much are you ready to bid on a guy who might just be hot, right? I mean, that's to me where the analysis comes in. So with daily leagues, a lot of it's lineup management and then running out to the wire when I don't have a lineup that I feel good about. But on those weekly leagues, I'm always focused on the waiver wire so that I'm ready for Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, the bare minimum is setting the lineups and, making sure that you have the players in them, checking the injuries, checking the players, checking the status, of course. Ruvain, anything else to add in terms of your bare essentials of what you need to do each and every week to really get there?
Yeah, I want to look at my guys on my team and see if they're actually playing every day, see if they're playing every other day, and why they aren't playing. Whether it's because of injury, whether it's because they all of a sudden now they weren't performing well, now they're in a platoon. Whether the schedule is not favorable for them, whether it's a 5-day week or 7-day week. These things, I think you can. It doesn't take that long to do. Just if you think a guy is underperforming, or you look at the stats for that week and you say, "Oh, wait a second, this guy's not putting up any numbers. Why not? He's getting a whole bunch of zeros. What's going on?" Take a look. Is it because he's lost that playing time? Is it because of an injury? I think those are very important because then the following week you can decide if you want to take them out or substitute someone else in.
Yeah, the playing time is really the key, and just tracking your own players. Well, Ruvain, so tracking your own players and saying, are these players still getting the playing time? Now, obviously, if you're at the top of your team, the first 5-6 players taken, you're not going to check. We know Freddie Freeman is playing every single day. I mean, he'll get an off day once in a blue moon, but he's playing. You don't have to check. But for fringe guys, your fourth outfielders, your middle infielders, your utilities, your seventh starters, you really need to check whether they're actually getting the playing time. Playing time is key. The teams that win are the teams that accumulate the most at bats and innings, just like that. You got to check whether your guys are performing. You have to do a consistency check. Do it once a week. I mean, you're setting your lineups, but the whole point is to see whether you're actually getting the projection that you're expected. And the other point I'll make is that, and we said this in last week's show, that you really have to tie together the waiver wire and setting lineups. They're really all in one. When you're making pickups, you're making pickups with respect to the lineups.
100% agree.
All right, so Scott, in terms of the extras, like we talked about priorities here, what would you say are the nice to haves? What are the next couple of priorities that you would do either each week or every couple of weeks in terms of your time?
Yeah, generally speaking, that's where I'm really looking at sort of standing movement, right? Because when I'm looking at my roster, especially in weekly leagues, when I have limited ability to add to my roster, I want to be able to look at the standings and say, okay, where am I trending? I can't check the you can check the standings every single day, but you're not going to see the big movement every single day. So I try to space it out when I'm looking and say, okay, how am I doing in runs scored? Right. I know that for my 15 team NFB or my 15 team tout league, runs scored has been a real problem. So now that I know that, it actually helps me make my waiver moves and my future lineup decisions. For example, in that league, I'm not proud of it, but Jake Bauers is on my team, right? Because I needed runs scored, and he's been showing, the Yankees have shown that they'll put him in the top of the lineup. That offense is not what it used to be, but if you want to get runs scored, you look at the top of the lineup. That's your best chance to get them generally. Not a lot of guys who bat at the top of the order are available in a 15-team league's waiver wire. Jake Bauers was, so I grabbed him, and it hasn't helped as much as I'd hope. But my nice to have is being able to get that sort of strategy. I try to make time for it once a week. Sometimes it's every other week, but you can't do it every day. But I try to make sure I understand what my needs are so that when I do make waiver moves or I'm making lineup decisions, I'm getting the most juice I can, right? To make sure that I get what it is I need. Because sometimes that's the tiebreaker. I have two similar players, but they offer different things. I make sure I pick the one that gives me what I need and let the other one potentially ride the bench.
Yeah, I mean, the quick way that I do waiver pickups, if I'm in a really pinch, is I look at what's going on the last 30 days or the last 21 days, pick some time frame, and you say, who's scoring the most runs? Runs are tied to the runs are the category that's the most tied to success in fantasy. Who's getting strikeouts? Just sort by those categories. Okay, and then I'll look, this guy looks interesting, this guy looks interesting. If I have more time, I'll use that to bubble up the players, but then I'll do the deep dives. Take a look, is he lucky? Take a look, is he striking out less? Take a look, is he walking more? Is he barreling the ball? Look at where he's hitting in the lineup, and deep diving each player. The bubbling up to the top is the quick way, and then you just have to make your guesstimate either by name recognition or by pure stats, or by upcoming schedule. But then the deep dive of finding the components of the players is the next. And before we go to Ruvain, we're going to do the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
So we were talking about playing time, and now we're talking about how to check our stats and everything like that. One of the things you obviously want to know about playing time is, are they actually playing every day? So currently, this is a trivia question, currently, how many players have played every single game of the season so far and not missed one game?
Ooh. Any guesses, Scott?
God, I want to make a guess that's a little higher because I know there's Iron Men on every team that just lock down like second base that I won't always think of. I'm going to go with like 40, like 1.5 guys per team. Ooh. 40 to 45.
I'm going to say it's a little bit less than one per team. I'm going to go with 22.
The answer is 10. There have been 10 players who have played every single game. 3 of them happen to be on the Braves. You have Ozzy Albies, who's played every game, Austin Riley, and Matt Olson. That lineup stays steady, and that's something you should look for. If you need stats, you look at these lineups. If these lineups are consistent for certain teams, and you have a guy, let's say you need a power guy, and Marcelo Zuna happens to be available, you know that he's going to have these guys ahead of him every single day. You need a stat. You need runs. You want to get maybe Orlando Arcia, who's on the team, who may not be the best and most sexy middle infielder out there, but he's going to get you runs because you have those main three guys playing every single day. You know he's going to get them knocked in. You know they're going to get their numbers. And if you do that, I think that's the best way to look on your stats. If you can find a team that has a guy who plays all the time, then you find a guy who's batting right above them, like you mentioned, Scott, like a leadoff hitter, or even below, you know that they're going to have a chance to get knocked in because these great players or these really good high fantasy value players are playing around them.
Do you have the names of the other 7?
I don't have them offhand. I heard this trivia question somewhere else, so I did steal it. So I apologize. I did hear it on the radio, so I do apologize. But I do know offhand that those 3 on the Braves have played every day.
Okay, no, great question there. Scott, how important are the player deep dives in terms of your time, and do you think it's an efficient use of time to really do the deep dive as opposed to maybe just hear about it on a good podcast or just take a look at their surface stats?
Well, it depends on the podcast, right? If they hear about it here, the work's done. Right? I'd say I like deep dives, but I need a little bit of a cop-out answer here. I need something I'm actually looking for, right? I need what it is. Like, I don't want to just look at a guy and say, I'm just going to deep dive everything that you're doing, right? It's, it might be the question of, is this heat or is this skill, right? Are they showing something new? Or if I'm looking at, on Twitter today, I posted about Ellie De La Cruz because he's been struggling badly in the second half. I wanted to get an understanding of what is happening with Ellie De La Cruz. I was able to do that using some metrics we have over at Pitcher List, pitch level data, to say, oh, look, the issue is that he's actually making good contact. He's making contact more often than we expect him to based on our model. The problem is he also swings at everything. Right? And his decision-making is poor. So I have an understanding of why this player is struggling, and that tells me whether I maybe want to, Ellie De La Cruz is a very hard guy to trade for, so he's not a great example, but it's giving me, I'm trying to look up something so that I can take an action. And to me, the deep dives are really important when I'm looking for an action. They're not so important just to randomly look at every guy's hot. The human brain is limited. You mentioned it, when you're trying to quickly go through the waiver wire, you look at guys, how they've done in the last 21 days or 30 days, because you need to shrink the list. You can't look at every single player. That's simply not something you're going to have time for. And even if you had the time, your brain doesn't have the capacity to remember every single one of them. So for me, they're really important when I'm looking for an action to take. Maybe that's trading for a guy. Maybe that's trading a guy away. Maybe that's, am I thinking, hey, he's been struggling. Is it time to cut bait? Or is it time to, and if it's time to cut bait, then I want to do a deep dive on a guy or two on the wire so I can understand what I'm getting in return. But they're extremely important when there's an action attached.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think during the season, it's really about having the actionable thing to look at. I'm not doing deep dives on players that I don't own that are clearly owned by other people. At what purpose? I'm not going to do anything. Unless I'm considering a trade, I'm not going to do that. What about preseason, though, Scott? Are you a guy to deep dive on a lot of players? Like when you go through the first baseman, you're really digging into it? Or what is your process preseason?
Preseason, a lot of it is about, you cannot deep dive everyone. I do top 30 rankings at each position. And even then I cannot deep dive everyone. A lot of it is, over time, you have evaluations of players. You have some, we've talked about Freddie Freeman. We kind of know what Freddie Freeman is. So if I'm doing a deep dive on Freddie Freeman, it's because I want to say, hey, last season, the power was down. Is there something there that I need to understand better? Right? Is there something that I might start a deep dive? Because you can do shallow dives, right? You can sort of skim around and say, is there something here that stands out? Is there a stat, especially for a veteran player, that just doesn't line up with what I expected or what they've done in past seasons? So then, it's almost like I try to skim lots of players to find a thing that is worth my time researching. right? Looking into why Luis Arias had a high batting average, because that's what he is. He has amazing contact ability. It doesn't matter where you pitch it. He can put it over the second baseman's head or the shortstop's head, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing to research. But when I'm going through my ranks, I'm saying, okay, I've got a tough time deciding between these two players. I'm going to quickly look at both, see if there's a stat, or, maybe they break a mold. Maybe they're a player that doesn't necessarily swing and miss as much as their strikeout rate would suggest. Why? What are they doing? I spend a lot of time on it in the preseason, but I try to make sure that, again, it's something actionable. It's something where I'm trying to make a skill decision about a player or an evaluation. Or if I see projections for a guy and I'm like, these projections don't line up with my expectation. I understand the projections, but what is my expectation based on? Is it just wish casting, or is there something I've been seeing that the stats can show me that would make me say, hey, you know what? I think this guy's better than projections.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I mean, for me, the process before the season starts is I use projections to bubble up to the top players that might be bargains. Like I compare the projection evaluation versus the market, and I see which players look like a bargain. If a player is a bust according to projections and the market somehow loves them, I care less about that, right? I mean, I guess I could deep dive everyone, but if I have to pick and choose in terms of my time, I'm going to first take a look at the guys who the projections say is worth it, right? And then we deep dive them. And that's what we do on this show, right? We go through all the corner infielders that are big bargains, and we take a look and see whether we agree with that. And if we do, great, add it to the list of draftable people. Ruvain, what about you? What's your story in terms?
Yes, that's you have to have this word of caution here when it comes to doing a deep dive. Sometimes doing a deep dive is not necessarily the best thing. Sometimes doing a deep dive makes you convince you to get a player that you really shouldn't be going after. Like me and you are, we're in an NFBC league. We did a deep dive on Ben Lively, and we thought, 2-star pitcher. The numbers look pretty good. Everything looked really good, and then we liked the 2-star that was going in, and then he gives up 13 runs. I mean, sometimes you have to be
Was that
a word of
injury
caution.
related though? He did go in the IL.
I think his ego was hurt because I don't think he was real. I mean, he's supposed to come back and is first available when he's coming off the injury list. So I don't think it's. Yes, it was an injury, but I think it was more about him just getting his head back together. It's a matter of sometimes doing a deep dive is too much, and sometimes you don't do deep enough dive. It's too shallow, and you don't get the information you need, and you don't get the right person just because you either did too little or too much, and you convince yourself one way or the other.
Scott, in terms of fantasy content that's available, and there's so much. There's writing, there's podcasts, so much stuff. How valuable do you think that is in terms of being efficient, right? Are you someone to get information from podcasts and use it? Is that, listen to the top 3 podcasts and really give that an idea? And I'm talking more you as what do you think the average listener in terms of consuming content? Is that a big thing, or are you someone to recommend really do more of this on yourself and the information on the podcast are more entertainment value?
I love podcasts, like you mentioned earlier. I've got my own Hacks and Jacks, but I actually do listen to other podcasts. And the reason for it is, like you mentioned, one, it can give me some ideas about guys I have not noticed, right? I do a hitter list ranking every week, 150 batters based on a 12-team standard format, and I do not know every player. So I do try to listen. I like listening to podcasts, particularly about prospects. That's not something that's in my wheelhouse. I wouldn't know really where I want to begin with that. So podcasts can really help you, or at the very least articles, which I sort of use in the same vein. I want something that can help me with an area of weakness, right? Like nobody's good at everything. The human brain has its limits. So where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? I like to listen and read about things that I'm not that good at myself. Right. So I want to, Shelley Verstrate, who's now over at NBC Sports. I like reading her stuff because I like the way she evaluates young players and prospects. And she does it in a way that I don't think I could do. Right. I don't pretend that I'm smarter than everyone else. There are things I do on my own because I've honed those skills and I feel comfortable with them. But there's a lot of skills I haven't honed. And that's really where I like to go find the outside content, so that I can support my game without having to pretend like I can be a scout.
Yeah. I mean, I love listening to podcasts, and I read a lot of fantasy baseball, obviously. Does it make me a more efficient player to get the information from them? I think I agree with you on the stuff that I'm not good at, right? If I'm not good at prospects, or I'm not the best guy at player evaluation, listen to Paul Sporer and Justin Mason, Sleeper in the Bust, and they go through players. I generally wouldn't do that. That's something that they could do a better job at. For the things I'm good at, for projections, let's say, I don't really need to listen to that. I use it for the informational purposes, but I do love the entertainment. I listen to the guys that I think are interesting, right? That the guys are funny, the guys make me laugh. But yes, in terms of efficiency, there's only so much time in your day. I think that all the information and the content out there is a net positive, but obviously there's a lot to do. So, do the ones that really fit what complements you, right? Do the things that you think would add to your knowledge, not that agree with you, if that makes sense. Ruvain?
Yeah, I listen to bits and pieces of podcasts. I don't get it. I don't have that much time in my schedule to do that. I do listen sometimes on my commute, and that's great. I like it, like you said, for the entertainment purposes. But really, if you go onto Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it now, if you follow the right people for prospects, if you follow the right people for streaks, for streaky players and stuff like that, like a Mike Curlin, he's always tweeting out all this information. And certain guys, if you follow these certain people, you can just, if they come up on your feed, they pop up right away, and you can see what's going on, and you can learn a lot that way. And if a name stands out, like if one person mentions a name, then another person mentions the same name, then another person mentions the same name, then maybe, where there's smoke, there's fire, and then there's maybe something going on with that certain player. So, besides the podcast and besides everything like that, if you actually use other aspects of social media, you will find areas where you're deficient in, where you can bulk yourself up just by literally just refreshing your feed.
Right. And of course, always listen to our show every single week, right? That's the number one.
I mean, that's a given. I mean, come on.
That's the number one best way. And of course, Hacks and Jacks, right?
Well, obviously, yes. Right? I mean, that's that's the basics, 101.
Just for the audience, Scott, could you just tell the audience, what your show brings to the table and what you think you guys excel in?
Yeah, so we're really a hitter-focused show, right? Forget the fact that I work for Pitcher List. I let Nick and those nerds talk about pitching, right? So we talk a lot about hitters. We talk a lot about, I do a top 150 hitters every week. So part of our conversation is just talking about guys that have moved around on this list, right? Especially focusing on 10 to 12 team leagues. We talk about players that are relevant in the deeper formats as well. But again, I don't pretend that I'm great at all this 15 team stuff that, this show is much better at, that Sleeper in the Bust with Paul and Jason or Justin, they do a fantastic job with that. So we really focus on some of these 10 and 12 team leagues and really hitters. It's especially just looking at like whether we try to focus on actionable things. Not just so-and-so is good, too bad he's rostered in 80% of leagues, right? We try to look at players that are doing exceptionally well or doing exceptionally poorly, talk about what we think is making that happen, and then whether or not you should do anything about it. And to me, I think that's the best takeaway from our show. We try to give you something to do about every player we talk about.
What do you think is the priority in terms of looking at the current standings, looking at your specific roster decisions in terms of playing time and value, maybe even versus trying to trade in the league? Like, how would you rank the importance of doing the buy category, the buy value, and the trading opportunities?
So as the season goes on, it changes slightly for my top two, which starts with by value and then by category. As the season progresses and I understand my team's weaknesses more and more, that balance shifts a little more towards category because that's where the value then is for my team in particular. And then for me, trading is at the bottom. Trading is often the last way I want to try to get back. I mean, sometimes I have no choice but to make trades because I'm either far behind or it's a stat like stolen bases, which while there are more of them this season, if I need to get a big boost, I will likely need to acquire players from other teams. And also steals are something people are off, steals and saves, teams are generally ready to sell off if they feel like they're comfortable there, or it's a keeper or dynasty and they don't, they're not in competition, so they don't need those things. So it's really about value, then category. Those things can kind of flip the closer to the end of the season we get. And then finally trade, just to supplement the category piece, because that's usually why I'm making trades. It's either for a position or a category, but more often than not, it's a category.
I think that trading has gone down in terms of importance relative to the others over time here. There's so much information out there available, and everyone knows more. People are so averse to trading that they don't want to. They know more, and they don't want to lose trades. They don't want to, I don't want to give up that. People are also more clingy to their own players, their favoritism. I see less trading. So for that reason, I'm less inclined to spend my time trying to look at trades. I mean, when I first started playing, I would, go through my roster every other week. Who can I trade? What other team would be good for? Let's make a deal. But less and less people are really engaging it and ending up with the trading that I'm just finding less of that. And of course, in the NFBC, there is no trading, so you don't have to deal with that at all. But for me, that trading has really gone down in priority. You think so, Ruvain?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's harder to make trades just because of that. Just like you said, there's too much information out there, and also the way you perceive a player compared to how someone else perceives a player is different based on what information they consume. So it's so much harder to agree on a quote unquote fair trade, and a lot of times trades get yelled at or complained about in certain leagues. So I think trading should really be on the bottom. And Scott, to your point, I think now is the time at the point where you're supposed to look at the standings just a little bit more than at your roster itself and see where you can improve, because the season is basically 2/3 over right now. We have 4 months in the books already, so there's only 2 months left. So if you're going to try to catch up in certain categories, now's the time to see that, because if you're going to try to catch up, let's say 20 or 30 RBIs in 1 month, that's going to be very hard to do, I think, or stolen bases. You're just behind by 10 or 15. I think you do need some time in the season to be able to catch up. So I think at this point in the season, it's based on the standings, then based on your roster and waiver and everything like that, and then trades.
And the final strategy topic or point that I want to bring up is down the stretch, if your team stinks or is way out of it, how much time should you really put in a league? I mean, theoretically, if it's of no value to you, you should actually not even look at it. I mean, I'm in one league. It's not a lot for me, but in GDD, Derek Carty and I just for whatever reason, the players didn't work, injuries, blah, 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 bad play, whatever it is, we're in next to last, okay? There's no point. We're not going to win. Not even close. Should I try it all? And if so, what should I do? I'm thinking that ethically, I should at least set my lineups to make sure that I have legal guys, that I don't have injured guys. If I do have injured guys, replace them. But after that, I mean, I don't see a point in terms of bothering. I know it's for rotisserie leagues. You want to be fair to everybody. But if I have a lot of things going on, should I do that? I think I'm ethically inclined and really positioned that I have to do the basics, but I don't think I have to do any more than just making sure I've got legal lineups and non-injuries. Do you agree with that, Scott?
To an extent, I think the word you're using is the right one, and that's try, right? Like my wife and I had twins in April, right? And I have some leagues where I'm not doing very well. They're redraft leagues. There's nothing I can really do to, make trades for next year or make ads that will impact me next season. I can't do any of that. So I will try to put out legal lineups, particularly because the two I'm doing worst in are head-to-head leagues, right? And, I don't want... To me, what my ethical obligation, if you want to call it that, is I don't want to upset my league mates and give someone an advantage that, is unfair or probably more accurately unlucky, right? I don't want to do that. So I will try to keep a lineup set. I'll try to make sure I have it. If a guy gets injured, one of them's a daily league, and if a guy gets injured on Tuesday, I might not notice. But I will check it once or twice a week to make sure that I can make those changes. I was going to lose the matchup anyway, but I should at least roster full team, make someone else do the bare minimum, because I know that that's what my league mates expect of me. But I think that's the other key. I have one or two leagues that I don't think anyone would care if I stopped looking if I was in last place, even at this point in the season. Because to them, really, they know that by this point in the season, it's all about the top 5 or 6 teams. That's it, right? There's usually a chasm there in that particular league. And so if you're at the bottom, nobody really cares what you do. It's head-to-head category, so you're probably going to lose 7-3 or something anyway. If you don't pay attention, the worst thing you'll do is give them 1 or 2 extra wins. That to me is sort of the level of I don't want to cause trouble for my league mates. I want to do something that impacts the integrity of the league. But again, that to me means just try, right? Look at it once in a while. Sometimes it's the commissioner's job to remind me, hey, Scott, you've had an injured Boba Fett in your shortstop spot for a long time now, right? Could you come and make an adjustment? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'll do that. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, as commissioner, I've had a bunch of leagues where I've reminded guys with a month left that you're not going to make your innings requirements. You got to pitch some pitchers, and I've reminded them. And in one extreme case where the guy was just absent, didn't want to, I just said, all right, guys, we're going to take some guys off the waiver and waiver wire, or off of their bench at least, and put them in the active lineup just so that they get their innings requirements. Otherwise, they drop in the ERA to the bottom, and somebody gains probably what they shouldn't have. For head-to-head, if you're playing a team the last week of the season, if your team's out of it, but you're playing somebody and there's 2 teams left fighting for the last playoff spot, I don't know, are your league mates going to be angry if you don't set the lineup and try to win? I mean, your point is a good one, Scott, that, okay, as long as your league mates are okay with it, sure, but maybe in that scenario, maybe you need to try. What do you think, Ruvain?
I think you have to try for pride. I think listen, at the end of the season, people come up to me and ask me, so how do you do in your leagues? I don't like having to say that I finished in second to last or third to last or in last. I'm going to do my best to get out of the cellar and have a respectable end to the season. A lot of teams, and a lot of leagues also, if you're doing well in the league and you know that other teams are not going to do like a half a job and not really pay attention, you could try to take advantage of that because you'll know you'll be able to get some guys cheaper on the waiver wire. So maybe you'll put your waiver wire bids in a little differently. So you have to plan this a little bit because if you can see this happening, maybe you could take advantage of it in some cases.
And by the way, I'm not trying to tell you that I'm a guy who slacks. I actually don't do that. I actually try hard in every single league. But we're talking about time management priority. Obviously, if I'm in the money and I'm trying to shoot for first place in the NFBC league where the payout's $7,500 and there's a $100 league that I'm in a home league and I'm in dead last, I mean, is it fair to really say, well, I got to try in every single league? I mean, there's a point, right? There's a point where, I understand the league mates is very nice to finish 9th instead of 11th, but, there is priorities, right? And I understand that. And then there's football, which I don't really get into all that much, but, people have priorities. I'm just saying that there should be a minimum guideline for what people should try, and acknowledging that there is a priority in life.
But what do you say to the people who have, let's say, 10 or 15 teams, and 3 or 4 of them are just in the crapper already, and they're still managing the other 12? It's not like they're not trying; it's just setting their priorities differently, and then spending more time on those better teams.
Yeah, I mean, in the NFBC, people do that all the time. People have 30 teams. They're obviously not going to manage teams at the bottom the last month, right? Would you, Scott?
I mean, no. I'm in too many leagues, which is a different number for everybody. But I'm in too many. I think it's about like 11. And I mean, that's what happens early in the season. I do try to balance it out, but the later it gets in the season, I do try to make sure I've got a set lineup. But I will look to my bench first before the wire. Right? Like I'm not scouring the wire in some of those leagues because there's not much value in the limited amount of time I have. I got 3 kids, 2 cats, a dog, and a guinea pig, right? Like they get a lot of my time. So the amount of time I have left for fantasy baseball isn't a ton. So I do try to use it, the best way I can. I also know I need to reduce leagues, yada, yada, yada. But ultimately at this point in the season, I try to make sure I do what is expected of me in those leagues where I'm not doing well and it's redraft, there's no future implication. But I've also tried to make sure I understand what exactly that is.
Well, good, healthy, ethical debate, and hopefully we've given you some ideas as to what you should do and what you should prioritize first. Let's do some waiver wire picks. Scott, who is a player on the waiver wire that you'd like to pick up for this coming week?
This bleeds a little bit into a guy that we'll probably talk about in another segment too, so I won't talk about him too much yet, but Garrett Whitlock is a guy who I think in a lot of leagues where you don't have an IL or you have a very shallow IL would have gotten cut. He's coming back. He's got a 2-start week. I think it's a fairly favorable one. So he is someone I'm looking at. Again, two starters that are actually worth starting at this time of the season. Really hard to find. Really hard to find pitching just in general. This is a guy who I think has really good skills. He's just really struggled with injuries this season, a little bit of inconsistency. But at this point, especially in leagues where maybe I'm in the middle of the pack, especially with pitching, it's time to take a shot. And Garrett Whitlock is a guy who has skills that I think a lot of other waiver wire pitchers at this time of the year don't have, 2 starts or not.
All right, any hitters to talk about?
Yeah. So, one guy I've been looking at in a lot of leagues, and I apologize, I don't have quite the numbers in every single league, but Mike Moustakas. I can't believe I'm talking about Mike Moustakas here in the year 2023 because I probably shouldn't be. But here I am anyway talking about Mike Moustakas because he's found himself hitting in the middle of this, unfortunately, injury damage lineup over in Los Angeles. But Moustakas, he's eligible at second and third base in most formats. And while he can't run. He can barely jog. It was kind of funny listening to Tigers announcers recently talk about the way Moose runs, but he's still got some pop in that bat. And it's, again, especially in deeper leagues, guys who can bat, 4, 5, 6, just don't come up every day, especially ones on teams that have a guy like Shohei Ohtani on them. So there's someone to drive in. So Mike Moustakas is a guy in deeper leagues that I've been looking at. I don't think I'll have to bid much because Mike Moustakas hasn't been very relevant for quite some time, but I think he'll be a way for me to fill in some of these middle infield spots that, or corner outfield spots that have sort of been ravaged by injury. If you've lost a guy like Josh Naylor recently, Mike Moustakas might be able to give you a little bit of that juice back for a while.
Yeah, please tell Josh Naylor to come back soon. Ruvain, how about you? Who's some waiver wire picks for this week?
Well, Josh Naylor may not come back soon. He's got an oblique injury and he may be out 6 weeks or more. So, you can wish, but we'll see what happens with that. One guy I want to mention, I mentioned, I think last week or the week before, is Logan O'Hoppe. He's owned right now in 28% of CBS leagues. He's on a rehab assignment already. He had shoulder surgery on a non-thrown shoulder, but he's still about 2 weeks away. So if he's not owned in your league, this is a week to get him for almost nothing because you're going to start hearing some hype about it in the next couple of weeks, and you're not going to get him as cheap, especially if you don't have that much fab left. Another guy, if he's available, I doubt he'll be available because he's owned in 48% of CBS leagues, but Royce Lewis is supposed to come off the IL this weekend. So if you go through your waiver wire and you see his name pop up, you should definitely put a bid in for him. And another guy really, 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 really deep is a guy named JP Martinez or Juan Pablo Martinez. He's being called up tomorrow, which is Friday. He's being called up by the Rangers. He's a highly publicized international signee out of Cuba. They signed him in 2018, and this year in AAA, he batted 312. He slashed 312, 427, 565, 12 homers, 33 stolen bases in 67 games. So if he's available and you're in an AL only league, he's a guy you should definitely look at. But even in deeper leagues, if you want to take a chance on someone, the Rangers do have a bunch of injuries. He's a guy to think about in the back of your mind.
So I'll mention a couple of guys, and I think at this time of the year it's more category specific. I'm less inclined to look for just some overall upside value. I'm targeting the categories. Power, Max Kepler, only 30% owned on CBS. He's batting third or fourth every day. He is not doing as great with strikeout and walk rate, but he's barreling the ball more than ever. His exit velocity is up quite a few, like 2 to 3 ticks. He's got 18 homers, 45 runs and RBIs, and less than 300 at-bats. For those playing here, that's like in a 500 at-bat season. That's like a 30-homer player with 75 runs and RBIs. That's interesting. If that kind of profile fits your team where you need some pop and some run production, Max Kepler is an excellent choice, especially in the outfield where it's a little bit thin. For power, also 2-catcher leagues, the Gary Sanchez. He looks 2-catcher league relevant again. He's available quite a bit, so that's one guy. And stolen bases, how about Michael Garcia? This is more for 12-team, I'd say. If 15 team, you should own him already. Batting .278 with 18 stolen bases and just 300 at bats. That's a 30 stolen base pace, I should say. If you need him down the stretch for some stolen bases and a guy who won't kill your average, that could be interesting as well. All right, pitcher preview. I know, Scott, you gave a pitcher already. How about you, Ruvain? Who's the pitcher that you want to pick up this week?
Well, there are two of them that I was looking at. One of them happens to be a Met, unfortunately, and that's David Peterson. He's a possible two-star pitcher. The question of him is how far he's going to go into games. He hasn't been going that far into games right now. Maybe he's going 3, 4 innings, but he is building up, and he's supposed to play Pittsburgh and maybe a two-star with against St. Louis. Those starts aren't that bad. He's pitching pretty decently. His ERA over those last three starts is 3.75, and he's got 13 strikeouts in 12 innings. So it's not horrible, but again, you may not get that much length out of him. But another guy who may be facing him on the Cardinals, Dakota Hudson. He's only 10% owned in CBS. His first matchup is Oakland, and again, maybe against the Mets. He's been pretty good. He's got, and now he's for a waiver wire pitcher. He's got a 4.3 ERA. His WHIP is not that great, but he's been pitching well recently. So he's a guy. If you're desperate for two-star pitchers, both these guys are good. Dakota Hudson will actually give you more length than David Peterson would.
Yeah, I am absolutely all over Dakota Hudson. In fact, he was the guy I mentioned last week. By the way, if you did listen to me and picked him up and started him, you did get the win. He is throwing longer. He's 3-0 so far, by the way. I think in terms of wins for this week, Oakland, the Mets, you can't get much better if you're trying to really get a shot at wins. He's only 10% owned, so he's probably available in your league. Definitely a great pick. I'll mention two more. Wade Miley, I tell you every single week to pick up Wade Miley. Another win. He went 6 innings, 2 hits, 1 run his last start. Now, tricky for this week because he is a 2-star pitcher, but it's against the Dodgers and Texas. I'd say I'd actually recommend him, especially if you need the wins. If that's the category, good chance at wins. So, listen, there's upside and downside, but usually a 2-star pitcher who's winning some games going long, probably worth it. Also, Brady Singer. I know he doesn't have a fantastic ERA overall, but since June 1st, 3.53 ERA, 119 WHIP. And by the way, the FIP and XFIP and all those ERA estimators, they agree. He's actually been that good since June. And by the way, those numbers, the 3.53, that includes a 5 earned run outing and a 6 earned run outing and a couple of 4 earned run outings. So he's had some stellar outings out there. He's 2-start this week. Seattle and Chicago Cubs. Might want to give him a shot. The wins are a little fickle on the Royals, but maybe he'll help your ratios, maybe, and you have a chance at wins there. So, again, we're talking about catching up in categories, so beggars can't be choosers at this point. Anyone else to add?
Yeah, so, another guy I've been looking at who, again, this is maybe more for shallow leagues, who probably got cut early on this season is Jake Cronenworth. Jake Cronenworth was hitting maybe a little closer to the top of the San Diego Padres lineup earlier in the season. He just got off to a horrible start, which is not what you want to see from a player like Cronenworth, who is supposed to be more of a high floor player, right? This is not a guy with a bunch of upside. He was supposed to give you some floor, some decent counting stats from hitting, in a good spot in the Padres lineup. He just wasn't doing it, but he has been doing it lately. The overall season line is not very good, but starting on July 28th, he just went on an absolute tear. He had a bunch of 2-hit games in a row. He had 5 2-hit games in a row, went on a long hitting streak. And, again, a player like him is supposed to be a high floor guy. He can make a ton of contact. He's hitting 383 over his last 50 plate appearances, 420 OBP, 596 slug. And again, I'm not saying that this is a guy who can be a huge difference maker for you. He's batting 6th right now, but he's scoring tons of runs, 10 runs in this stretch. Getting some RBI as well, even though, you'd think that would be more just hitting behind some of the middle of that Padres lineup. I think in either respect, you're going to see these counting stats come in from Cronenworth, and he's eligible at both first and second base. So in those 12-team leagues, I am guessing Jake Cronenworth was probably cut in several of them, and he's someone worth scooping up. Again, if you need to fill in a spot at first or second base due to recent injuries.
Yeah, he had a very bad start to the season, but I projected him pretty high overall for the season going into the season, and we see that he's back to his form. So maybe it was an injury. We didn't know about it. These things can happen. I mean, it's hard to say, find a guy who's not injured, but if we really could discern what a cold streak is cold versus an injury versus bad talent, that would really be the key, right? I mean, Rizzo, how do we know he had hit an injury? We just thought it was a cold streak. It's just very hard to do that. But if you can, it's worth $1 million. All right, Ruvain, talking about injuries, why don't you give the rundown for this week's injury report?
Okay, we'll start with Bo Bichette. He's on the IL with right patellar tendonitis. He's been taking some swings and jogging, but due to the lack of strenuous baseball activity being done, he will probably not return this weekend or maybe not even the beginning of next week. We'll see how that goes. Josh Young was placed on the IL with a left thumb fracture. He had surgery. Plates and screws were inserted. He's expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks and hopes to be back by the end of the season. But based on his surgery, there's a good chance he may not be back in time to give you anything relevant. He may be back the last week of the season, and you don't know where you're going to get back. So he's a guy, if you own him, you may be willing to drop him because you don't know how much you're going to get out of him, and that roster spot may be extra valuable to you. If Ezekiel Duran is available in your league, he's a guy you can scoop up because he's been playing third. Another guy in the Rangers who's actually coming back sooner, and that's Jonah Heim. He was placed in the IL with a left wrist tendon strain/tear. He's already faced live pitching, and he may return this Monday, so that's someone to watch for. Byron Buxton was placed on the IL. Where have we heard that before? With a right hamstring strain. Twins bench coach Jace Tingler actually said that Buxton will be shut down for the next 2 weeks. They will see how he responds, and then we'll see what goes from there. A guy who's maybe available in the league, you want to play him because he's been hot and cold recently, and that's Matt Wallner. That's someone to watch for. Carlos Rodon was placed on the IL with a low-grade hamstring of the left leg. Question is, will he be back when he's first eligible? He's still throwing off flat ground. He hasn't stopped doing that, so there's a possibility. But a pitcher and a hamstring, I don't know how those things go that well together. Joe Musgrove was placed on the IL with right shoulder inflammation. He's been shut down for 3 weeks. I know I spoke to you, Ariel. We have him in one league. We already dropped him because best case scenario, he's supposed to start catching again August 24th. So best case scenario is a mid-September to late September. I don't know how many innings you're going to get out of him. So he's another guy, if you may want to think about dropping, he's a guy you may want to drop. Two guys, I want to end on a little positive. Walker Buehler, he's rehabbing from Tommy John surgery, the second Tommy John surgery last year. He hit 93 during a one-inning sim game this past week. Dave Roberts said that it went really well, much better than he expected. Buehler acknowledged that his goal of returning September 1st is not that realistic. He'll throw a couple more sim games and then have a rehab assignment, and we'll see how that works out. But I don't think you're going to get anything really fantasy-wise out of him this year. And another guy coming back from Tommy John surgery, John Means. He's 16 months post-Tommy John surgery, followed by a 2.5-month absence because of a low back issue. He's been cleared for a rehab assignment, and he may make his return to the Orioles by the end of August.
Hey, Ruvain, over under 2.5 innings this season for Edwin Diaz.
I'm gonna say under. I don't think it's going to be, if he pitches, it's only going to be once. It's going to be similar to what happened to Noah Syndergaard a couple years ago when he had an oblique issue and he was out for a very long time, and he came back to pitch once and pitch maybe 1 or 2 innings. I don't think they're going to try to push him because they have him signed under contract. They don't want to push him too quickly. There's no reason to, and there's no real value in doing it.
Yeah, but isn't one reason, too, is to really help the fan base because, I mean, just suck the air out of it with all those trades and we're not going to be good. But how great would it be to go to a game the final week and I mean, there is some point to it, and he doesn't even have to be that good in the game. I just want to hear the trumpets.
But you have to use your head and not your heart. Your heart, you're a Met fan. You want him to come back. You want some positive vibes going to the offseason, which is because this has been a very bad season for the Mets. But he's so valuable to your team. You can't push him too quickly too soon or have him push himself too quickly too soon and then have a setback and then have him be a question mark going into next year. Yes, if he doesn't pitch this year at all, he'll still be a question mark going into next year, but he'll have more time to recuperate, more time to go through the rehab and make sure that he dots his I's and crosses the T's when it comes to that, and he doesn't hurt himself when he does come back.
Scott, help us out here, the Met fans.
First of all, I think the first thing you'll learn is that loving baseball is a real hindrance when it comes to running a baseball team, at least from what I can tell by watching the way owners run their teams. But yeah, I don't think he will, but he should. Exactly because of the reasons you said, Ariel, because nobody's going to the ballpark thinking like, man, I really hope Brooks Raley comes in today, right? Like he's a good reliever, but like there's no like, does anybody other than like Brooks Raley and like the staff at the ballpark know what his walk-up music is? Right? Like, there's something special. I'm a Tigers fan, so I've been watching Miggy And, I'm so glad that he's been able to play most days because, yeah, I know he's not the best player and that he's not necessarily helping this team get the most wins. But, when I take my kid to the ballpark, it's to see Miggy, right? Like, that's the guy that matters. Forget all the fantasy and forget all the way that a lot of these way ownership likes to run teams. Like, this is about baseball. It's about a game that everybody's supposed to like and enjoy watching. And there's not a lot of reasons to do that for the Mets, at least in the last couple of innings when they're losing. So why not give them something, anything, right? Like, just don't do what Oakland does. And that's like actively dislike your fan base.
Yeah.
But you also have to consider that no doctor has ever been wrong for holding a player out, while doctors have been wrong while telling a player to go back in and play already. You have to keep that in mind also, and that's how management should think, and that's how management usually does think.
Well, I mean, yeah, if he's truly not ready, but like my fear is that they're going to say, yeah, there's no reason this guy shouldn't pitch in games, but we're just not gonna. Because of, the slight risk. But of course, living is slight risk, right? So again, I'm saying this more as like the fan. I get it. That's not the calculus that ownership is using. And, there's a lot of arguments to say it shouldn't be. But if he is in fact ready, God, I hope he can just go out there and do something for a fan base that really had their hearts ripped out after such an exciting offseason to now have to go and just be like, yeah, remember that? That was cool. When we had all that excitement on the contracts, and now it's all gone.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to hear. Put it this way, Ruvain. If you heard that Edwin Diaz was going to pitch in the last week of the season, would you go to that game?
Yes, and I wanted to go to the game when David Wright was going to come back, and I wanted to go to the game when Noah Syndergaard came back.
Right.
What does this is to put fans in the seats. If he wants to do that, that's fine. I'm just nervous, and being the Met fan, you always have to be nervous that they're going to do something to screw up this year.
Oh,
already.
they're going to screw
That's
up
what I'm
next year. We're Mets fans. We know it's going to screw up next year anyways. Just give us our moment is
true.
what I'm saying,
All right. Well, listen, if he would come, if he's pitching on a certain day, would you go to the game?
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, so that then, I mean, the same reason why we had an over/under a couple years ago of 2 at bats for Tim Tebow. Why would, it's the same idea. It's to draw fan. I'm not saying you can't compare these two players, but it's putting fans in the seats, and that's what this would be doing. That's all.
Exactly. All right, well, we'll end on that note. Thank you so much, Scott Chu, for coming on the show. Well, before we let you go, why don't you just tell the audience where we can follow you and hear your stuff and all things Scott Chu.
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on the website formerly known as Twitter, twitter.com, I should say. That's still true. It's at If the Chu Fits. So if the CHU fits. You can also find my work over at Pitcher List. I'm the senior fantasy analyst there. I do hitter rankings. Those come out on Wednesdays, sometimes Thursdays, depending on how things are going here on the home front. Also, Hacks and Jacks, the podcast that I do with Joe Galena, that comes out every Monday morning, and it comes out on time because Joe's the one responsible for that and not me. And then also, if you're on Reddit, every Friday I host an AMA over on the Fantasy Baseball subreddit. So if you ever have questions or just want to join in that conversation, come on over. We get tons of questions and comments and just reasons to talk about baseball because a lot of us, our spouses and partners and friends, are tired of hearing about our teams. But you know what? I'm not. I will listen to you talk about your team. So come on over and do that. You can do that in the comments of my articles or over on the AMA, whatever you want to do. Let's talk about fantasy baseball while we still have it.
I got Joe Galena trying to pass me in Tout Wars head-to-head. Please tell him to cease and desist.
Oh, will do. Don't let him. I'm not going to be able to handle that on the podcast. I can't let him get that uppity, right? I can't let. Oh yeah, I got ahead of Ariel. I can't let that happen.
He beat me twice already this season in the head-to-head, and I mean my record.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. Oh, you know. Oh boy, not good. And it was just one of these things that if I didn't play this guy and I played this guy, then I would have won. Oh man, Joe. All right, Ruvain, what about you?
You can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come, next man up, and everything like that. You can also read my weekly article on Rotoballer discussing all the injuries I discussed today, as well as many others to try to help you manage your injuries throughout the rest of the season. And
I'm Ariel Cohen. You can find me over at X.com, Twitter, whatever you want to call that machine now, at ATCNY. I'm on Fangraphs, I'm on Rotoballer, and of course the Beat the Shift podcast. I won't say every week because the next 2 weeks we're going to be taking some summer vacation with our family, so you won't see us for 2 weeks. We'll be back at the end of the month and for the rest of September to help you win down the stretch, but we're going to take some much-needed vacation, Ruben and I, with our families respectively. All right, once again, thank you so much to Scott Chu for coming on the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.